well as writing about several other sports. Dave, thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Before we get to the Nationals and baseball, of course, NFL draft, that's coming up quickly. Do you think that it takes away too much from the attention of baseball? I mean, because it seems like the lead-in for the draft just goes on for months.
It really does, and the NFL, really all sports, but the NFL as much as anybody is a 24/7, 365 pursuit these days. It used to be where, during the off season it was quiet and you kind of forgot about the other sports, but anymore, the teams are trying to market the off season just as much as they are during the regular season. So yeah, the NFL draft gets a lot of attention on ESPN and the major networks just because it's such a traffic driver for anybody to be covering the NFL and the specific teams. But I think baseball fans are a little bit more, and not necessarily isolated, but singular focus. I think once baseball season starts, the draft is kind of a secondary pursuit, maybe on the peripheral. But I think generally most baseball fans are like that.
No, you're right up our alley. I mean, we all love football, but I mean, baseball's the number one thing. So enough football. On to the real sport. What are the 2 or 3 biggest surprises to you of the early baseball season so far?
In general, I would say probably the Chicago White Sox are the biggest surprise. I mean, they had so much trouble during the preseason and the whole Adam LaRoche saga there during the spring training that to see them come out of the box like that, I think is really surprising. Another surprising team to me is the Yankees. I mean, they have not been very good at all, and obviously, they're already looking for ways to replace Chase Headley, who just it can't hit not only his weight but probably his wife's weight right now. He just it's hard to have a corner infielder slugging 305 or whatever it is right now. So those are probably the 2 biggest surprises team wise for me so far this year.
Yeah, and you mentioned getting off to a fast or slow start, and the Nationals, last year they were expected to easily win the World Series. There wasn't going to be any kind of anyone in their way, and of course they didn't meet expectations. This year they're really basically the same team, and they've lost a couple of pieces, and they've added some pieces. Are you surprised at all by the Nationals' fast start?
I'm not particularly, just because of the level of competition that they've had to face thus far this season. I mean, they've had 6 games with the Braves, who, we've seen all the troubles that they've been having down there, and really that was kind of predictable. They've also, gotten to play the Phillies a bunch. They got to play the Twins, who probably won't be as bad as the Braves, but won't be that far behind. So, the Nats really haven't really run into anybody. They had a series with the Marlins in Miami, and that was probably their toughest competition. Of course, with today's game, they just got swept by the Phillies at home, so that's not the way you want to head out on a 10-game road trip, which they're going to start this week. But I'm not particularly surprised. If anything, it kind of disappointed that they haven't taken advantage of some of the chances they had. They've lost 6 games now, and I'd say that of those 6 losses, 3 of them they should have won. And like I said, getting swept by the Phillies at home, heading out into the road trip, that's a tough way to go too. But they're really struggling offensively right now. They haven't scored a run in their last 20 innings, so it's just they're still missing Ben Revere, and they've got a couple of guys that are just really slumping hard, and it's going to be interesting to see how they handle this road trip going through St. Louis, Kansas City, and Chicago, 3 very good teams.
Yeah, that will be interesting, definitely. One guy who did get off to a good start, Bryce Harper, little-known Bryce Harper. He's a new guy a lot of people don't know about. He's totally destroying the league as per usual compared to last year, especially as of last year. Has he passed Mike Trout, do you think, as the best player in baseball?
That's a tough question. They're kind of different players. Trout, historically has used a little bit more speed in his game. I guess he didn't run as much last year as he did when he first came up. But, I don't like to say this guy's better than that guy, or you look at numbers, you look at the underlying skills that produce those numbers. I think they're both just tremendous ball players. They are probably, 2 of the 5 best players in the league. But I wouldn't want to weigh one against the other or try to debate who's more valuable. I think both players are called upon to really carry their teams. I think the Nats probably have a little bit more talent surrounding Harper, especially as far as the starting pitching goes. But the Angels really rely on Trout to drive that offense. And like I said, I like to enjoy players of that talent level for who they are individually, as opposed to trying to compare one to the other. I know that sounds wishy-washy, but I really feel that way.
That's a fair answer.
Yeah, absolutely fair answer. Sticking on, not Bryce Harper, but his teammate, Daniel Murphy. He's really not too far behind him. Of course, he's not going to hit .391 for the season. We all know that. Do you think the Nats will have enough hitting? And right now they're not, but do you think that it'll pick up enough to pick up the slack once Murphy comes back to earth?
Well, I hope so. And I think the people that follow the team hope so. Ben Revere started a rehab assignment today, as a matter of fact. It's going to take him several games just to be able to get 4 at-bats and coming back from this oblique injury, and then probably 30 to 40 at-bats to get his timing down and that type of thing. So, it's still going to be 2 weeks before they get him back full-time, unless they just completely panic and decide to bring him up and have him play his way back into shape on the big league club. I don't think Ryan Zimmerman is going to hit 230 all season. I don't think Anthony Rendon is going to hit 225 all season. I have less confidence in players like Jason Worth and Danny Espinosa recovering. Of course, the Nats have one of the top shortstop prospects in all of baseball, Trey Turner, just lighting up AAA, waiting for his service time to get to the point where the Nats can have an extra year of control on the back end. So they've got those reinforcements coming in June. Plus, they also have the best, one of the best right-handed pitching prospects in Lucas Giolito, doing the same thing in AA, waiting for an opportunity to come up and pitch on the big league club. So there are reinforcements there. I just hope that the Nats can tread water long enough until those replacements are on the big league club.
And speaking of pitching, we'll switch to the mound. Scherzer, he certainly hasn't pitched up to his standards. He's only looked good twice out of 5 starts. What do you think's going on with him?
Well, I have concerns about Scherzer. He so far has maintained that that it's just a slight mechanical thing, that he's not finishing off his fastball, and that's why he's having trouble with location. He's already walked more this month than he did in the first 3 months of the season last year combined.
Right.
It's a bad sign. The Washington Post had a story the other day about how he's dropped his arm angle a little bit, and I did a little bit of research on that using a couple of the different stat services, and it really looks like that he has changed his arm angle. That to me and to most medical experts is a sign of fatigue or injury. So, you got to hope, if you're a fan of the Washington Nationals or a fan of baseball in general, that Scherzer knows what's going on with him, and he thinks it's just a little mechanical thing, that it's off, and it's not, an injury that is either being hidden or about to surface. Because, you look at the underlying statistics, the underlying data points, and it fairly screams a guy that's pitching through fatigue right now.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, because John Smoltz, he has the same kind of stuff John Smoltz had, and when John Smoltz actually came back from injury, he dropped down to more of a 3/4 angle. It makes you wonder if Scherzer just doesn't want to say, hey, you know what, I am dealing with a little bit of an injury. Hopefully he's not. Hopefully it's just early season.
And he might not even know it, right? These things, you can have an impingement in there, and he could be just doing it as a natural compensation more than and when I say hiding an injury, I don't mean that he's obviously injured and lying about it. I think more that he might feel either a pull or a twinge on occasion, and he's doing something naturally to try to fight through it, as opposed to lying about being injured type of thing.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point, actually. The rest of the rotation, especially Steven Strasburg, of course, is used to dealing with injury a little bit, and Gio Gonzalez have both looked excellent. But is Joe Ross possibly either the most surprising starter of 2016 or the best starter they have currently?
Well, it's a great question. Joe Ross was very good for a period of about 6 weeks last season. He kind of tired down the stretch once he once he hit his innings limit, and his last couple of starts weren't the greatest. His first 4 or 5 or 6 starts for the Nats last year, when he called up when Strasburg was on the DL, were fantastic. I mean, this is a kid that has a lot of stuff. Fastball, terrific slider, working on a third pitch. He tried a changeup last year. He's trying to use a splitter this year just to give a different look to left-handers. But really has got a good idea about how he wants to pitch guys. And he's a 23-year-old kid, and he's not up there just throwing. He's got a real idea about what he wants to do and how to finish guys off. And you got to remember, he comes from a great bloodline. His brother Tyson, is a terrific starter in his own right for the Padres. So this is a guy that we could still see have him suffer some sophomore blues, but I think it's just more of a continuation of the half a dozen good starts that he gave them last year. You mentioned Strasburg. If he stays healthy, I think that this could be the year where we all look at him and say, hey, wow, this guy really can do an awful lot of things as a starting pitcher. And Gio Gonzalez has benefited as much as anybody by the new pitching coach in Mike Maddox. So yeah, I think the worries about Scherzer aside, I think the Nats are pretty strong starting pitching-wise. Plus, Tanner Roark had a great start today, had 14 strikeouts his last start, and then I mentioned Lucas Giolito, who's leading in the wings. So as far as the top-line Major League starting pitching, I think the Nats are pretty solid.
What do you think Maddox has done differently with Gonzalez?
Well, I think he, as much as anything else, has tried to get Gio out of his own head. He got a little bit frustrated in his last start, but Gio's the type of guy where if he misses a spot to one batter, he lets it bother him for the next 3, and he can walk 3 guys in a row and then find himself in a lot of hot water. He's always had this stuff. He's been a high strikeout guy. He's got a terrific curveball, a pretty good process. He's always had a very consistent delivery. He just gets in his own head and gets frustrated. And I think as much as anything else, Maddox has gotten him to the point where if he makes a bad pitch or has a bad at-bat, can go on to the next guy. Like I said, this last start that he had, he kind of showed a little bit of frustration out on the mound to a batter, and Maddox went and visited him and just didn't walk out to him. He sprinted out and started patting Gio on the chest, and he's like, hey, focus, let that one go and go get the next guy. So if Maddox can convince Gio to stay out of his own head and bring his walk rate down just a little bit, I think we could see Gio Gonzalez on the way to one of his better seasons.
Yeah, and he's already proven to be a solid starter. So, the Nationals do have a good bullpen. They have Trinan, they have Rivero, nasty righty-lefty duo setting up Papelbon. Do you think, how would you compare Washington's bullpen to, say, the Royals or the Yankees?
Well, I certainly think they're at least one cut, if not 2 cuts below those guys. I mean, the Yankees and the Royals, when they're both healthy in the bullpen, they're just something to admire. I mean, each bullpen has 3 full-time closers in it, or could. I think the Nats are certainly better than they were last year. Last year it was one of their weakest links was the bullpen, especially that Mets series in August when the bullpen came in and blew 3 straight games, including one that they had a 6-run lead in. So you mentioned Felipe Rivero, terrific lefty. Had a little bit of trouble with it today, but it was his 3rd day in a row pitching. So that might be to be expected. But Blake Trinan, like you said, he's got a big fastball, terrific slider. They're limiting his usage to mainly being a right-handed specialist because left-handers have completely eaten him up in the last couple of years. But they picked up Oliver Perez, and he's a crafty lefty, and I think that they are much better than they were last year. I still don't think that they're anywhere on par with the Yankees and Royals, but I'd certainly put them in the top 3rd of the league right now, especially the performance so far. Things can change. You get an injury and you have to move things around, but they've certainly gotten off to a pretty good start.
Now, other than the team, talking about the team overall, other than Harper, obviously that would be the one guy you can't replace. Who's the one guy other than Harper you'd really hate to see on the bench, or I should say in the hospital due to injury, put it that way?
Well, I have maintained, even with Bryce Harper the last couple of seasons, I still maintain that the most important player on this team is Ryan Zimmerman. With all the injuries he's had the last several seasons, the move over to first base, it's that much more important with him at first base now that he remain healthy and put up the numbers that you would expect a Ryan Zimmerman to put up. Because if he were to go down again, the Nats have no answer at first base. They've got Clint Robinson, who would be the immediate fill-in, 30-year-old journeyman, rookie last year, had a great season last year, but is hitting about 110 this year in very limited work. I worry that if Clint Robinson turned into the everyday first baseman, that he would not be able to produce at the rate that he did last season. After that, there's really nobody in the organization that you could call up and have play first base. I think if Zimmerman were to get hurt, they would end up moving Daniel Murphy over to first base, and that just opens up all sorts of problems, across the infield, depth-wise, everything else. So I maintain that Ryan Zimmerman, a healthy Ryan Zimmerman, is still the most important feature to the Washington Nationals.
Great viewpoint. Talk about another team briefly, the Mets. They're playing great ball right now, 9-1, and they're just a half game back. It's extremely early, obviously, but do you think the Nationals, do you think they'll still win the division, or does it even matter with the wild card format now?
Well, you don't want to be playing that first game in the playoffs where it's one game and out. I think you always want to try to avoid that. Obviously, the Mets are a very good team. They've got a terrific pitching staff. Cespedes looks like he's picking up where he left off last year. They made a couple of moves to bring in a little bit more offense. I think the Nats and the Mets clearly are going to be the top two teams in the East. I think Miami is going to be okay, but not great. I think the Phillies are going to be better than I thought they were at the beginning of the season. I thought they were going to lose 110 games to start with, but they've played much better since. I still don't think that they'll be competitive. But the Nats get the benefit of playing the Braves 19 times. Of course, everybody in the division does. So the Nats are going to have to they're going to have to win the games that they're supposed to win and then be competitive with the Mets. It remains to be seen. The Mets had the Nats number last year. They don't play them until mid-May, so it's going to be interesting once we get those head-to-head matchups. If the Nats can put last year truly behind them, if Dusty Baker has them playing loose enough to say, hey, last year happened, forget about it. Let's just go compete every night this year.
Well, Dave, we can't root too hard for the Nats because our third co-host, Ted, major Mets fan, he would be kind of perturbed about that. So we'll just be neutrally pleased with your efforts this year. Well, where can our listeners find you?
Well, I'm writing for the SB Nation site Federal Baseball now. My Twitter handle is @NicholsFBB. That's NICHOLS FBB. And if you're interested in our coverage of the other sports, our site is districtsportspage.com, and that's Dave Nichols, DSP, on Twitter.
And again, we want to thank Dave Nichols for being our guest today from Federal Baseball covering the Nationals. Enjoy all our great shows on the Happy Hour Network. We have the Seahawks Show, which is coming up Monday. We'll be talking draft. We have excellent guests, including Danica Brace from the Seattle Mist, which is a Legends Football League team. She's actually MVP of the league, former MVP. So definitely tune into that. We'll also have Stephen Cohen from Seattle PI and Danny Kelly from Field Goals on the show talking about the draft. Of course, we have Late Night Parent. We will have a Cinema Savants, which will be on